Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. The presentation is about to begin. Elliot?
Well, thank you, Anna. Hello, everyone. My name is Elliot Markowitz, and welcome to today's webcast and panel discussion titled Future Insights on M&A Trends, Midyear 2024 Expert Roundtable. And this event is brought to you by Law.com and sponsored by Litera. Before we begin, I'd like to get some simple housekeeping items out of the way first. This event is completely interactive and features many customizable functions. Every window you currently see, from the slide window to the Q&A panel, they can either be enlarged or collapsed. So if you want to change the look and feel of your console, go right ahead and do so. If you have a question for one of our speakers, please enter it into the Q&A widget on your console. That widget is accessible on the left-hand side of your screen where you see the question mark icon. We will try to answer your questions either during the panel discussion or at the end of today's event. We will answer as many questions as possible, so we invite you to ask away. If you don't get an answer to your question, you may receive an email response after the event, so please look for that. There are also some valuable resources provided for you from our sponsor. If you go to the bottom right of your console, you can see those and download those, and they can be valuable to you in the future. Remember, the more interactive you are, the more valuable of an experience this will be for you. Now let's get to today's topic and why you are all here. In today's dynamic market, staying ahead of mergers and acquisition trends is crucial. Many legal professionals are grappling with uncertainties around deal flow, valuation pressures, the industry-specific activity. This year began with a healthy dose of cautious optimism for the M&A market, and in this webcast, you will hear directly from leading transactional lawyers on what they are seeing in practice and what they anticipate for deal volume for the second half of the year. This event will address many of these issues, such as the trends likely to spur or dampen deal-making activity, valuation multiples, interest rate and inflationary pressures, which industries, I should say, will drive deal volume for the remainder of the year, plus future projections for the M&A market and best practices and technology solutions that will help you along the way. So before we get started, we're going to roll out a couple of polling questions for you guys to answer. So if we could see the first one, I was simply going to ask you which best describes your role. This just helps our speakers tailor their comments to make sure this is a valuable experience for you. Are you a partner, part of counsel? Oh, there you go. We're going to the second polling question. Oh, there we go. Are you counsel, associate attorney, in-house counsel, solo practitioner? And we're going to give you a couple of minutes to participate in that poll before we close it out, just to get a little bit of an idea of who's in the audience today. Okay, so it looks like we have a pretty healthy mix of partner counsel, in-house counsel. Okay, Anna, let's go to the second polling question. I'm going to ask you, about the largest looming concern you see in the next 6 months. Is it interest rates remain elevated, geopolitical uncertainty, U.S. election? It's always something new. So please just take a couple of seconds and fill that out. And again, this is just to give our speakers an idea of who's in the audience today and what are your concerns so they can tailor their remarks accordingly. And interest rates is always a big one. The U.S. election, I think that's going to become more prevalent as the year goes on. If we were holding this in September or the end of August, that would probably be number one. A lot going on geopolitically, and it's always something new. So yeah, it's a good healthy mix of this as well. So yeah, it looks like interest rates are a big concern. The U.S. election is obviously on everyone's mind, and then geopolitical uncertainty. So thank you for your participation in that. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Josephine Good. She's a solutions evangelist at Litera, who will introduce our speakers and moderate the discussion and tailor their questions to your responses in the poll. So take it away, Josephine.
Thanks so much, Elliot. And hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm joined by a fantastic panel, real experts in the field, to join us on this discussion about the M&A market today. So I'm going to introduce each of them, and then we're going to jump straight in and get started with the discussion. So I'm joined by Kimberly Patillo-Descord. She's a partner at White & Case, Rachel Pugliese, partner at Nixon Peabody, and by Paul Jascott, partner at Holland and Knight. Thank you all for joining. I very much liked that we cheated here and asked the audience to determine what was the biggest factor impacting the M&A market before we had our discussion. But I think that's where we're going to start today. So I know we sort of started this year, as Elliot sort of said in the introduction, with a lot of bullishness. And we were excited to see what 2024 had in store after sort of a lot of difficulties we had to weather in 2023. The poll touched on a few of those things we're sort of grappling with in 2024, but I'm going to start by asking each of you, what's your perspective? What's your outlook for this year? I think it's a nice point to check in halfway through the year and kind of assess what's happened so far. And as we look at some of those challenges, what you anticipate being the impacts of those for the rest of the year. Paul, I'm going to hand it over to you to kick us off and give us your perspective on the rest of 2024.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I think I would call it cautious optimism. The year for us seemed to pick up where last year left off, which was, keeping a good pace. We weren't necessarily burning the midnight oil all the time, but we were keeping busy. It seems like things have slowed down a bit. It could just be the prospect of a wonderful summer. But I think more likely that there is just some looming concern. The one item that wasn't on the poll was this idea of a potential looming recession that everybody's been looking for a bit. And I think we can touch on this later. There seems to be some hesitancy that we see in our portfolio companies where the business people are ready to go and go and go, but yet the sponsors themselves are kind of keeping them in check. So I think, again, there's opportunity, but there's some cautious optimism out there.
Yeah, I agree. And Rachel, are you seeing the same sort of hesitance or a little bit of uncertainty from your clients? And what are you seeing in terms of deal volumes now?
That question to me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't hear you. I do agree with Paul about the cautious optimism sentiment. For us here at Nixon, we felt like the first quarter of 2024 was a bit slow, similar to what 2023 was. The second quarter, though, this year we've seen an uptick in deal volume, and hopefully that trend will continue through the remainder of the year. Some factors that we think are likely to drive this is that, some PE funds have a lot of dry powder that needs to be used. And some PE funds also have been holding on to their assets and investments for 5 years or longer, so they're going to have to eventually do something with them. And then lastly, there may be some sellers out there who are just ready to sort of jump in the market at this point. There may be some owner operators who are just fatigued by the challenges that are brought on by COVID and supply chain woes, and they may just be ready for an exit at this point. So we've seen an uptick in deal volume in the second quarter, and we're hoping that continues through the remainder of 2024.
What about for you, Kimberly? Much the same picture for you at Whitey?
I'm a little bit more bullish, actually, on 2024. It's been very busy so far this year, much busier than 23, and I think all of the stats kind of show that we've had significant uptick compared to 23. I think 24 so far has been very busy. I do all strategic work, just corporates, not private equity. So that probably has contributed to my busyness. My PE colleagues have been a little bit more choppy. But from a strategic perspective, 24 has been busy. I think it will continue to be busy based on the pipeline that we have currently. But I think 25 is actually going to be spectacular compared to recent years. I think there's a lot of pent-up demand. I think the election will be in the rear view. We'll know what the outcome is. We'll have a little bit more of a sense, at least in the US, as to the regulatory environment that we're going to be living in for the next few years. And I'm optimistic. I do agree with Rachel on the private equity point. I mean, more important than the dry powder they're sitting on is the assets that they're sitting on, that the market needs in order to feed. And I get it. They don't want to sell below their current marks, which are likely higher than the market will bear right now due to the cost of capital and other headwinds. But they have to release those assets at some point, because that's what's going to fuel the market. And IPO, the public markets are unreliable and unpredictable, and it's tough to be a public company. I do a lot of public company work. It's hard right now between the regulatory compliance burdens and the litigation risk. And so, if private equity can crack on and start putting some assets out there, I think we'll see a very robust pickup in the market. But strategics are playing very actively right now, and I think that will continue, notwithstanding geopolitical environment and election year around the world. It's not just in the U.S. Everyone's seemingly having an election this year. So I'm pretty bullish on the rest of 24 and even more so on 25.
Interesting. Well, we could do this again in 2025, same point, and check in on those predictions. But as you say, it sounds like we're sitting on a lot of opportunity, but just all of that sort of marred by what is a lot of uncertainty, and that uncertainty sort of cutting through all those opportunities and making people a little bit more cautious in terms of the risk that they're willing to take, be that pricing assets or anything else. I liked the polling question and the whole idea that, what are the sort of biggest concerns everyone has, and then just the concept that there's always something new. And that's really the sort of fun of doing these deals, is navigating all of those different risks and pieces of uncertainty and the impact that then has. So I thought, anyone answering that understands that, if it's not the election or other factors, there's always seems to be something, and that's part of the fun of it. Now tell me, in terms of your clients and your client perspective, what's the client sentiment you're getting right now? Are they feeling optimistic, or are you getting sort of feelings of neutrality from them? Kimberly, are they aligned with you? They're seeing sort of seeing opportunities and being optimistic about things?
Yeah, I think, I do a lot of public company work, and I think that they are optimistic. I think that they're also getting a lot of pressure from their boards. Board engagement on strategic planning in a post-COVID world has been very heavily focused on M&A and divestitures has been a very hot topic at the board level as a way to return value to shareholders. Otherwise, you're doing a special dividend or a buyback or trying to return in some other way. And so, the public company strategic buyers and sellers that I work with regularly are, I think, very engaged and focused on the opportunities that exist out there right now. But they need good targets. And so a lot of those are being held by private equity at the moment.
Yeah, and Rachel, you mentioned sort of private equity really sitting on all that dry powder. With the clients you're working with, what are you seeing their appetite is to deploy that for the rest of the year? What are they waiting for, I suppose?
I think they're waiting for sort of the right opportunity and the right buyer. My clients they want to do a deal, but you have to be willing to negotiate and you have to be patient. And they are trying to do that, just because you have to have a meeting of the minds. And so they're just being very patient right now and waiting for the right buyer. And it's taking longer than ever now to get a deal closed, from signing the LOI to actually closing. It's taking longer. So they're just being very patient at the moment.
Yeah. And Paul, same story for your clients?
I think, among the excellent points that were just made, Kimberly mentioned something that I completely agree with from a strategic side, and that is thinking about the D and not just the M&A, right? I think right now, many of our strategic clients are seeing the same thing that Kimberly's are, and that is an opportunity to refocus, retool, recalibrate, their strategy and where they're going, and seeking opportunities to divest assets that aren't core. I mean, we've all been through this cycle before where they buy, and then they sell after they recalibrate. But we're seeing a lot of, opportunity here to assist our strategic clients in divestiture transactions. And so in that sense, what's client sentiment? I think it's opportunistic and encouraged because, as Rachel said, there is dry powder. There's opportunity out there for, whether it's a strategic buyer or a financial sponsor, to come in and pick up some of those assets that the strategics are shedding right now.
Yeah, great. Well, we're going to go to another poll question. This one is to see whether everyone in the audience agrees with us. So as we look to that second half of 2024, is everyone in agreement? Are we going to see M&A activity increase? And I think honing in, we've talked a little bit about sort of the opportunities with PE, but are we going to see specific sectors accelerate even faster? I think we've already seen that in the first half of this year, particularly in the technology space. Is things sort of going to continue to be steady? The sort of volumes just sort of keeping up with pace, or are we going to see a slowdown with all of that uncertainty? I think probably what we would have expected coming in there, really certain sectors driving a lot of the activity. And I think we saw that with some of the mega deals as well, really driving up the numbers, both at the end of 2023 and at the beginning of 2024. Any comments on any of that? Is that what you would have expected, panel, in terms of the audience?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think there's typically always a small handful of sectors that are accelerating. I'm not sure I totally agree with AI just kind of as a standalone, or oil and gas as a standalone. I think we're seeing a lot in energy generally, so beyond just oil and gas. AI, I'm not sure. Maybe you put that in TMT a little bit, which I think is very, very hot. I think that's been the hottest sector so far this year by all of the stats. Industrials have been strong, and pharma and healthcare are always playing. But I think that will continue in large part. That those will be hot sectors for some period of time. They're also ones that are heavily regulated and are really facing a lot of challenges globally from a regulatory perspective on a number of fronts, which really makes for a challenging deal environment.
Yeah.
And I think for example, financial services, where, we do a lot of work in, depositories have basically been frozen for almost a year, and you're seeing some additional activity in that market right now. Whereas, last year, RIAs and wealth management firms were go. That seems to have tempered a bit. And then insurance seems to be steady state. So I agree. I mean, the idea of, different sectors that will pick up, but there's going to be, I think, some lumpiness, particularly, between now and the election, until the regulatory environment, regulates itself a little bit more.
Yeah, and I should say, we're obviously talking a lot here about from a US perspective. I wonder if people anticipating a slowdown might be in different places globally, experiencing their own challenges. I know we've seen sort of slower deal volumes and smaller deal volumes, in APAC. So I think we'll try to take a global view as much as we can today. But I think it may be different for different people. Great. Well, sort of taking this conversation and thinking a little bit about technology, but from the perspective of the deal making. That, of course, is sort of my perspective now working at Latera. But I'm curious, in your sort of role as a deal maker today, how are you sort of finding the impact of technology? What sort of technical frontiers are you tracking most closely that you're seeing sort of starting to be quite transformative to the transactional work you're doing, be that, in due diligence and, opportunities to draft using any technology? Are you seeing really with these deals now this year and all of the hype and all of the excitement around AI, are you really realistically seeing any of that leading to concrete benefits in any of these M&A transactions that you guys are doing?
I can start and talk about what I'm seeing. So it is a fascinating time to be involved in M&A from a technology perspective. We actually just had in our Boston office at Nixon, we had a hot topics event focused on AI. So we had different industry leaders sort of talking about how they're using AI in their various businesses. And we're seeing that investors are starting to use AI to facilitate deal sourcing efficiencies, deal execution, and then also portfolio management. Portfolio companies seem to be using AI to internally boost productivity and efficiency, and externally to differentiate and create competitive advantages by leveraging Gen AI to make products better for customers. And then strategics are using AI similar to how law firms are starting to use AI as well for due diligence and contract review. And so, you can use AI for contract review and due diligence, but it's a question of what is being output, and all that still needs to be checked by a human at this point, because we're just not sure about the results and how reliable that is. But I think that it will be transformative once we know that the output is 100% accurate, and it's just too new at this point to really know that. But I think in the future, if once you can rely on it, you can see AI just even being able to mark up a purchase agreement, really sort of be involved in all of the documents that you need to execute a deal. So it's an exciting time, and we'll see where it goes.
Paul, are you seeing AI really come into your practice in a meaningful way, or is it still very exploratory?
I think we're not on the front end of the wave. I mean, we're probably right there in the middle. I think we can do a lot more, and I've always said I don't want to be the dinosaur that still acts like a typewriter or something, that is some novel thing that we're using here. We are seeing it's a lot because of speed to execution, right? On a lot of our transactions, even though they end up, it seems like in today's market, something that Rachel said earlier, stopping and starting maybe longer. I mean, at least starts out with speed to execution. And so the AI tools that are used, to help with due diligence are clearly something that we are, using day to day. In fact, we are having, our younger lawyers here come out and evangelize it to our partners here, where, it's kind of reverse mentoring, if you will, where, the younger lawyers are out there and explaining to us dinosaurs, how we can do things better, smarter, and more efficiently. And then, of course, knowledge management and being able to draw the knowledge across the firm, particularly in a firm like ours and many others that have expanded greatly, take advantage of that knowledge. We're seeing AI come in with the ability to gather and manage that knowledge and put it to use for the benefit of multiple clients.
Yeah, I think what's even more interesting, like AI from a law firm perspective, we have to do it, right? Like Paul says, we can't all be dinosaurs, and we have to keep up and be efficient and find better ways to do things. Clients are extremely cost conscious and looking for ways to get more out of dollars. So for sure, from a law firm perspective, we're doing a lot on the tech side and developing our own AI models and so forth. But the fascinating part for me, and I'm not a tech person at all, about AI is the M&A element of AI, meaning how it's coming up in deals from a diligence perspective. And so if you have a target that relies heavily on AI or is using AI significantly in their business, and everybody is, it's just a matter to what extent and how they're using it. it's all about the proprietary data and the engineering talent. And so from a diligence perspective, from a figuring out the copyright infringement issues and the data privacy issues, the regulatory regime. I mean, there's over 20 countries or regulatory bodies, plus each state in the US, Colorado most recently, that are trying to regulate this in some way. And so it's an unbelievably massive thing to try and wrap your arms around from a lawyer's perspective, to make sure that your clients are thinking about the right things, doing the right amount of diligence, that you have the right expertise, so that you're not buying a headache. I kind of feel like AI is where we were, several years ago when ESG kind of first got coined as the term, and we were all thinking about it, and nobody wants to buy any headaches and skeletons in the closet, and we have to unearth all of these things. And those things are still present today, but AI is kind of this new wave of a lot of regulatory regime analysis, and a lot of figuring out how clients are going to buy this, use this, integrate this, and using it in the integration process is actually really fun and cool for lawyers.
Yeah, and it's I love that perspective that, of course, AI is coming across your desks internally as well as externally as you're looking into those businesses. And I think, as you say, sort of exploring something that for many is relatively new in terms of the concepts and what we should be looking for and understanding, definitely brings an exciting opportunity. But as you say, potentially some risks with those businesses where we don't yet have all of the guidelines in place to regulate all of this technology. I know we're sort of working on different statutes here, and everyone is across the EU too in terms of regulating some of those technologies, but definitely an interesting area to diligence at this point in time. I'm going to make sure we give the audience a say, so we'll move to the next poll, which is just to check in with the audience. In your roles as deal makers, I think we have a lot of partners and associates on this call, but maybe some of those who are in-house. As you look at AI, and we'll perhaps look at this from two perspectives, Kimberly, AI in terms of how it's influencing some of your deals and the business, but also your business itself, how much of an impact are you seeing that is having? Mission critical, really important. And I think this comes to the use of AI specifically. Are you finding that using AI is useful, but you need some oversight of it? Are you finding the hype too much? Is that probably the third answer? And actually, it needs a bit of time to get to where you need it to be. Or is there just still a lot of uncertainty with that? What to use, what it all really means? See what people have to say. No one's thinking it's the be all and end all, mission critical, and we can't go on without it at this point. So I think we're all okay. I think we're all still able to do our job at this point. Great.
We're not extinct yet, Paul.
Yeah, I didn't think Paul was a dinosaur, so we're all good. I'm just going to pick on a question, actually, because I think it links nicely that's come in, which is, as we think about that, do you have sort of views on whether it's changing what the junior and mid-level associates need to learn? Are you seeing that skill sets are changing of M&A lawyers, and as they're sort of having to adjust what they focus on?
I think it has to. I mean, I think it's a real challenge, for the law schools to really think about here. I mean, we get a lot of questions about, is AI and the tools that we're using here going to replace junior associates? And it's not. I mean, I think everyone's jobs are safe. It's just a matter of what those skill sets are. And I would view it as an opportunity where, a lot of the, if you think about a lot of the grunt work, if you will, that the juniors would be doing, even something as simple as years ago, putting together, you're doing the certificate, you're doing all the basic documents, and then you're putting it together a closing binder, kind of see how the deal is all put together. I mean, that's all automated nowadays, and so young lawyers working with the law schools need to figure out how to, not only understand the substance and find ways to, earlier on have a deeper understanding of the substance, but also using some of these technology tools. I mean, my daughter, who is a future lawyer, she's been working at a firm up in New York, but she's doing document automation up there as a legal assistant, and that's going to help her, I'm sure, when she goes to law school, and doing the practical skill set coupled with the substantive skill set as she begins her legal career. So I think there's a good opportunity, to sum up, a good opportunity for partnership between law firms like ours, and law schools to figure out how exactly to give younger lawyers the tools that they need in order to succeed as a practical matter in the practice of law, as well as in the substance of what we do.
Rachel, are you seeing your firm do anything specifically in terms of those junior lawyers? Or are the junior lawyers asking you to do things specifically in terms of supporting them?
With everything that Paul said, I think that for junior attorneys, it's probably going to make them just more efficient, because they won't spend their time sort of summarizing an operating agreement or other documents in the data room. AI will do that, and they're going to have to fact check it and spot issues. And so their skill set remains the same. It's just maybe just a little bit less busy work at this point. So I agree with Paul. I don't think that AI is going to replace junior associates anytime soon.
Yeah, great. And what I'm going to do now is come back and really hone in on one of those specific challenges we talked about, which is that sort of regulatory scrutiny that the deals are facing, elongating those deal timelines often, putting a few challenges in the deal maker's way. We've got a few questions on it, and I know we have a poll question for the audience, and I'd love to sort of get your thoughts. I know it's been sort of a big headwind, and maybe it's kind of in some ways stopped that absolute sort of full throttle that Kimberly wanted going into this year. So how have your practices adapted to that sort of regulatory scrutiny that the transactions are now facing? Kimberly, I'll come to you first on that one.
Yeah. So, well, there's the specific question I think we have from the audience on the regulatory environment in the UK, and an increased level of scrutiny and what sectors. And I think the answer, as it applies to the UK, applies kind of more broadly, which is yes, the answer is yes. The CMA is very active and looking at deals. They're particularly in tech, which is not dissimilar from the US. But the regulatory environment right now and its impact on deal making is the very first question that we are talking with clients about before they even are thinking about an NDA, before they're thinking about entering into any sort of process. They're having us do kind of a desktop review global as it relates to the merger control FDI regimes around the world and in the relevant jurisdictions, which is very different than when I first started practicing, which was antitrust. Sure, you thought about it and you dealt with it and you did your filings, but it was not what was driving the decision whether to engage or not engage. But it has some very serious consequences now, and we've seen a lot of deals get unwound after the fact, and we've seen a lot of expense and time be put into trying to get regulatory approval. And I think for clients, at some point it becomes not worth it. And if there's an easier path with some other target or buyer, then they will oftentimes take that. It's really part of the equation right now in terms of which is our more attractive deal. And deal certainty has always been paramount for folks, but right now it is really forefront, and they're doing a lot of that work up front because the regulatory environment is both intense and unpredictable.
And Paul, I'll come to you. How are you helping your clients navigate that? Much the same, really putting it front and center of the deal discussions from the start?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Kimberly said. And building on that, it is an issue up front, yes or no. Let's evaluate it to figure out whether it's a go or not, and how we proceed with deal certainty. But it's also a continuing issue, because if it is a go, it gets into the due diligence for purposes of operations and integrations. And when you think about it, I mean, you can talk about regulatory environment and approvals needed to do the deal. You think about the complexity of a regulatory environment operationally and integration wide. Kimberly mentioned earlier data privacy. I mean, Colorado changes in law. I mean, if you think about now, it used to be, okay, we have to look at data privacy generally, okay, GDPR, whatever, internationally, and then California, right? Everybody asks about California. Now it's California, Massachusetts, Illinois, Colorado, and any number of different states just about data privacy. I mean, think about other regulatory issues or governmental issues. State tax, right? I mean, that's usually one of the first areas of diligence that goes in to figure out if a target has been operating their business in a way that's been complying with an ever vigilant and ever vigilant, taxing authorities across. And those types of healthcare regulatory license or state licensure requirements here. So for us, it is evaluating the ability to get the deal and understand the risk associated with the transaction, but it goes beyond that. It's understanding the operations and the risk going forward and how to integrate that into a target that is, as it intends to be compliant on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, Rachel, anything to add to that?
So they did a great job. I agree with everything that they said. Yes, there's heightened regulatory scrutiny, so we need to look at it, before we even decide to enter into an LOI. If we do decide that it's a go, the one thing that clients really need to focus on is, of course, the all-important executory period covenants that are in purchase agreements and other definitive documents. Because if you do sign the purchase agreement and you have to do a filing and then it gets delayed, that those covenants will govern the target's conduct and operation of their business in between signing and closing. So those covenants are very important to clients now, because of the heightened regulatory scrutiny.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a question that's come in specifically asking for all of your expertise in terms of the documentation. We've talked very high level, and this is probably the area that the AI can't help with at all, which is the AI doesn't have your market knowledge in terms of what you're seeing with some of the sort of needs of the documents and what you're needing to draft. Is there anything else other than sort of those covenants that you're really in this market seeing being looked at more closely? Are there particular provisions or language in those purchase agreements that you're seeing consistently being a sticking point in negotiations? Anything, Rachel, that comes to mind other than the covenants?
Honestly, not really. I mean, there are, of course, a lot of covenants that govern in between signing and closing. And so there's, the conduct of the business, how the target's going to conduct their business. There are, of course, just the regulatory and HSR covenants as well, and what sort of efforts everyone has to use to get the filing approved. I think that's it. Kim or Paul, do you have have you seen anything else in your practices? What else are you focusing on?
The thing that jumps out at me is, I think, earnout provisions. Especially in this, if people are, depending on who it is, right? Are you bullish? Are you cautiously optimistic? But when you're having an earnout there to bridge, expectations to value, you're seeing, it's the usual pull and push, but I think, those covenants and those types of operational covenants that sellers are putting in there to try and control the business, post closing, we're seeing a lot more detail in there that we're having to push back on from the buy side.
Yeah, I totally agree with both Rachel and Paul. And actually, I'm working on an article now with a colleague on earnouts because they're back to bridge this valuation gap. But she's a litigator, and she describes this current M&A environment using earnouts as business development for the litigation practice.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I think the litigators will be busy in due time as a result of all of these earnout provisions that we, you know, argue and fight over, and then eventually people throw up their hands a little bit because you have to do business with these folks. They're going to be your employees. You're potentially, in many cases they will be, if you're, particularly when you're buying from founders or smaller private companies. All of these folks are still involved, and do you really want to be fighting now over an earnout? But you'll just end up fighting later, quite frankly. But yeah, the earnout provisions and the other covenants that Rachel mentioned, I think are forefront for M&A practitioners at the moment.
Yeah, great. Well, good questions. Keep them coming in. And I'm just going to ask the panelists, it's such a big topic that we tried to cover today, which is just the state of the M&A market. And we could go down so many different paths discussing it. But what topic do you think deserves a little bit more attention today that perhaps we haven't spoken about, or you want to go into in more detail, and that you want to really make sure your clients are aware of? And Paul, I'll start with you. Anything else that's really front and center of mind for you and for your clients?
Yeah. In prepping for this call, I was thinking about that. And the one thing that jumped out at me as a result of some recent experiences is the role of restrictive covenants in transactions now, and that the dynamic changes that are being put out there and suggested. Again, I joke, it used to be, okay, we don't have to worry about anything. We'll put the sales-based non-compete in the purchase agreement. We'll have all the employment agreements, the restrictive covenants, and we'll make a special provision for the folks out in California. Well, again, in today's deal making, particularly with the developments over the past 6 months, I think it's something that I know that we, working with our labor and employment colleagues, are just a lot more focused on. Some clients' approach are, well, you know what, we'll drop it in there in our transaction documents, and we'll fight about it later on. Some of them like to rely upon blue penciling or whatnot, but it really does deserve a deeper level of review and analysis at a kind of core deal level. And then also once you get into the ancillary documents, the employment agreements, on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis, and determining, where those agreements are going to be governed. I just think that that's a level of focus that that deal makers, maybe the HR professionals, are understanding it, and they're caught up with developments. But certainly the deal makers out there are probably a little bit behind the curve on that, and need to understand that it needs extra care and attention when negotiating deals.
Yeah, great call out. Rachel, anything from your perspective?
I think the one thing that clients in really every single corporate entity in America needs to be concerned about now, and maybe educated on if they don't know about it, is the Corporate Transparency Act, which came into effect this year. Every single entity that's formed or was previously formed needs to go through this analysis and compliance. You need to figure out whether you're dealing with a reporting company, and then if there's beneficial owners, they have to submit certain information to FinCEN. And so it's created more workflow in deals. And some clients just aren't even aware of it. So it's just an education point at the beginning of an engagement. So I think that's the one thing that I spent a lot of time educating clients on this year, and will continue to do so.
Another great tip. Kimberly.
Yeah, so I think, look, M&A is fun and hot, and it's what we all do for the most part, and we hope we do more of it. But I've been spending a lot of time talking to clients about kind of just liability management broadly. And so you have maturing debt interacting with a higher rate environment, And so you have to, every company should be evaluating options for liability management. And with enough planning, I think that there are some really good opportunities to think about how M&A plays into that, how you are allocating and deploying your capital, how you're returning value to shareholders. I think companies need to spend some time thinking about that and not automatically defaulting to M&A, which again may be the answer, but I think that there's a lot of analysis that needs to go on. When you think back to 2020 and 21, when we were going like gangbusters, a lot of that was irresponsible, quite frankly. And I think we're feeling the hangover of that now, and have been. But I'm bullish on this year and next year, and I think we're going to come back from that. But I would just encourage companies, and I do with the ones that I work with, to think kind of more broadly, look at all of the various pieces of the puzzle, look at the regulatory environment across all of the different areas that we've talked about: antitrust, data privacy, tax, et cetera, and really spend the time being strategic and thoughtful, lest you become an activist target, and that's not where anybody wants to be these days, and be forced into that type of M&A or otherwise. So spending time thinking through all of those pieces, I think, is really critical at the board and C-suite level, and would encourage people to do that. And hopefully they end up at M&A, and my predictions are right for 25.
Yeah, I think great bits of advice and thoughts there. Thank you so much for those. I think that sort of covers what we were going to talk through today. We do have a few more questions. So I don't know if anyone wants to take this in the first instance. The questions come in asking about whether any of you are seeing seller notes and seller financing a lot, and asking about the risks around that. Who wants to take that one?
Seen two of them in the past 2 months, and they're usually lower middle market deals, but they are making a comeback, and it at least in the few deals that we've seen them on, again, smaller deals, it hasn't been that significant of an issue, because of the size of the deal, and they were basically willing to get the deal done. We had one last year that was more substantial, and that extended the negotiation process by at least a month, once we got into the as what you said here, the deep and dark subordination reference here. So 3 in the past year, a couple that were pretty small, but another one that was substantial, and yeah.
Yeah, they're definitely making a comeback. I think, the earnout provisions and then the seller notes, as well as sort of, rollover equity, all go hand in hand in terms of when buyers and sellers are negotiating a deal initially and trying to get a meeting of the minds to get that LOI signed and move on to the documentation. Those 3 things sort of bridge the valuation gap and help buyers and sellers sort of meet in the middle. With respect to the seller note, the one provision that always sort of jumps out at me is the right to set off if there's an indemnification claim. That's always heavily negotiated when you have a seller note. So that's something to keep in mind when you're working on one. But yeah, they're definitely coming back.
I would say in the large cap public company space, I think what you're seeing, to deal with the elevated interest rates, the disconnect in valuations, we've seen a big uptick in stock for stock. I think almost 30% of deal volume this year has included some stock component. And then I think almost 25% is kind of all stock. And I think it's a good way to manage debt borrowing costs for the buyer, a way to share in value creation from synergies for the seller. But that in the large cap public company space, I think we're seeing quite a lot of that these days, more so than we've seen in recent years. And that's
Yeah.
not without risk, given the choppiness of our, public markets here in the U.S.
Yeah, that's really helpful. A few other questions coming in here. Great questions, thank you. Anyone want to speak to transaction volumes in Asia? Anyone sort of cover that market, or perhaps we can take that one offline? Probably one best.
Yeah,
follow
well,
up after.
I'll just say one thing on it. I think that it is very difficult. It's a very difficult regulatory environment to have, China into the US, and that has definitely dwindled significantly. And I don't know if that situation will change significantly after the election. I suppose it depends on who wins, but that's been kind of on a decline for some period of time. I think what has stepped into that space actually and where we have our eye is on the Middle East. And there's investment into the U.S. from the region, but there's also a desire to bring more business and jobs into the region. And so we're seeing a lot more activity in certain industries, a lot in infra and projects as it relates to the Middle East, which I think is where a lot of folks who were previously focusing on transactions related to China are now spending a lot of effort and energy.
Yeah, well, I think we have got a good sort of global discussion today in the questions that have come in. So I think we have a wide-ranging audience. Great. Well, we want to give everyone a bit of time back before they inevitably jump on another call at the half hour. So any other questions that we haven't been able to answer, we'll be sure to make sure they're followed up. But thank you all so much for joining. I thoroughly enjoyed the discussion. Thank you so much to my panelists for joining me. And I love the optimism. I'm going to go into the rest of the week with that and the rest of the 2024 too. So thank you all. Elliot, I will hand the reins back over to you.
Well, thank you so much. That was certainly a great and impactful discussion. There's obviously a lot of uncertainty going on and a lot of activity, and you folks really took a big subject and try to really make it palatable for our audience. So great discussion. That is about all the time we had today. Thank you for joining us. We hope it was useful to you. Thank you again to our speakers and to Litera for their support. If you missed any part of this presentation, remember it will be archived shortly at law.com. So you can view it again, or you can refer someone to it. And while you're on that page, we encourage you to also explore other upcoming and on-demand webcasts. Thank you again, and have a great afternoon.